Hi, I'm Henry Golding, and this is Game Devs Contest, a channel about all things test automation and upstream quality for games. Today's video is an unedited recording of yesterday's #NotGDC automated testing roundtable meetup. That's an informal event that a few of us set up via the automated testing in games Discord. If you're not already in the Discord, definitely worthwhile joining. I'll pop a link in the description. So without further ado, here's the video. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. As you know, this is kind of like a last minute thing just to kind of have some kind of thing for people who weren't able to go to GDC, because I do feel like it's a shame that you have to pay all that money and go to a place to connect with like-minded folks. So I think at this point everyone knows how to conduct themselves in a virtual meeting. The only kind of point I note is let's be mindful of letting other people be heard, and kind of sharing the floor. Other than that, I guess we could move to some brief introductions. I feel like there's few enough of us that we could do introductions. So I'll start. I'm Henry. What am I? Oh gosh, I didn't even have an introduction prepared. I guess I used to be a gameplay programmer, and then I somehow became a test-like person, and worked on things like Sea of Thieves and Minecraft and the test frameworks and developer culture for developers writing tests around those things. Was at Epic for a year, and now I just this year started my own consultancy. So yeah, who would like to go next?
I can go next.
I'll go. Oh, sorry.
Or I can call on people if it's easier.
This will be easier.
Okay. Dara, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. My name is Dara Lydon. I'm a lecturer in games development in Queen's University in Belfast in Northern Ireland. Teaching students basically from diverse backgrounds, converting them into games programmers, essentially. So people coming from music, medicine, civil engineering, architecture, all types coming in to learn just Unity, essentially, so far. But next year, we're doing a course that's like an advanced version of the same thing. I want to teach them how to use testing for their jobs, essentially, because when I went around the industry, everyone was like, no one knows how to test. We have to teach them after they come in and burn loads of our money, teach them how to do this. We'd prefer if you did it for us. So that's why I'm here. I used to be a games developer, but I couldn't handle it anymore. So I became a teacher instead.
Awesome, a noble path. All right, I'm just going to go clockwise on my screen. So David?
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is David Barrett. I'm currently a quality engineer for Maxis and EA across a few different games for The Sims. The new title, Project Renee, and The Sims 4. Previously, I was interning with Minecraft over in 2021. That was when I was in college, and up until 2022, I did a lot of gameplay programming. And I was actually on the UX and user research side, and I, broke into the test space with QA and engineering, and I'm also really passionate about accessibility in games, how we can make games, more open for all. I'm super passionate about games as a whole. I, kind of dip my finger in a bunch of different areas of development, and I'm trying to, get out there and see what's out there, honestly, as an early career person. It's very nice to meet you all, and look forward to sharing and learning from you all.
Cool. And so then I'm going to go Sebastian and then Lowe.
My name's Sebastian. At the moment, currently working at Epic Games as an SDET. I was actually brought on board by Henry. Before that, I was working in a financial startup, and then after that, aviation and marketing. So I've been kind of all over the place, but still with kind of the focus on testing. So hopefully I can bring all kinds of different experiences to this group.
Cool. And then I'm going to go Lowe and then Ricardo.
All right. My name is Lova Arvidsson. I'm a test automation engineer at Avalanche Studios in Stockholm, Sweden. Currently working on the project called Contraband, which is being published by Xbox. I've been at Avalanche for about 3 years, during which time I've been fully focused on working in test automation. Before that, I was a quality engineer at Star Stable Entertainment, working on their in-engine QA as well as QA for the GameStar stable online.
Cool. And I'm going to go Ricardo and then Angel, and please excuse my pronunciation, everyone, if I'm getting it wrong.
I'm Ricardo. I'm a freelance tech coach, tech lead, trying to figure out what I am as a freelance. I was in a company for 5 years, and since the pandemic times, I was pretty interested in QA and testing automation because I knew there should be a way different my company was doing at the time.
Okay, cool. And then Angel, and then Michelle.
Okay. Well, I could tell you where I have worked, but none of those companies exist anymore. They were super small and crappy places to work, to be honest. And since I have like parallel paths with Ricardo, since the pandemic, I have been thinking a lot about how to that there had to be another way of working. And in my companies, I had to fight tooth and nail to do it. But in my free time, though, I have found it. So now with Ricardo and another person, we try to teach people for free how to do all of that. So yeah, not much else. Yeah. I'm currently chilling and having a sabbatical time and enjoying savings while they last.
Cool. And last but not least, Michelle.
Thank you. Good evening or morning, everyone. It's evening for me. I'm in Paris. So my name is Michel. I've been in QA for well, the past 10 years. Most of my time, thank you. Most of my time in QA was done at Ubisoft in Paris. I started as a junior QA analyst in 2015. Worked my way up to a position of technical director for QA, which was a long way of saying that I was the in-house test automation specialist at that studio. I've worked on multiple projects across these years, spent some time on the Just Dance franchise, started working on test automation on Watch Dogs Legion, which was released in 2020. And I spent the last 3 years at 3 years and a half at Ubisoft on an unannounced project. I left Ubisoft at the end of the year, and I'm currently working at a new company. So I've been doing test automation for the latter half of my career. And a lot of my time was spent not only writing and maintaining tests, but also teaching test automation to my fellow QA colleagues and coaching development teams on how to implement writing and running automated tests as part of their development cycles and processes. And I will be fully transparent. I was very, very inspired by the GDC 2019 talk from Rare on the test automation of Sea of Thieves. It was pretty much the blueprint I used on everything I did during that time, basically.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone, and glad to know you all. Okay, so next thing I guess that the normal roundtables do is kind of collect topics that that we want to talk about in the time we have. So if that sounds good, maybe let's brainstorm some topics. And so it doesn't have to be like a huge detail, but just like if anyone has kind of questions or like areas they're interested in. So for example, how do you get developers to write tests? Or, how do you get value out of a separate QA automation team or an SDET team? Or what is the role of an SDET or those kind of things? Yeah, go ahead.
For me, I'm interested in a topic since did I interrupt somebody?
No, sorry.
No, it's fine. You can go.
I was like, I did not do that correctly. Yeah.
Yeah,
please continue.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Okay. since the money for my sabbatical year will run out in a few months, where should I start looking? Because I have been doing testing in games for so long, but in my local industry, all I hear is that doesn't work. Where should I start looking for a position where I could feel like comfortable working in? I don't really know the international industry, so yeah.
Yeah, great question. I think
Honestly,
let's
I mean,
kind of just jump in. And
open forum.
Loa, I think you had.
Yeah, I had one. So one thing that interests me greatly, because it's kind of been a lived experience, is how, when you're working specifically with test automation on a project where perhaps a lot of things have not been locked down yet. So we're still in a kind of a, you're still in kind of a pre-production, like features are still being worked on kind of way, which like that is a situation in which you can't really do test automation to any great extent because you need the systems to be locked in so you know what the test cases will be. What is the role of the test automation team or the test automation specialists at that point during the process?
Great question. Who's next? Yeah, David.
Sure. I guess one I had in mind would be kind of the abstraction between providing value for tests and like some of the best ways to present that information. Because I mean, at the end of the day, they're always going to be higher ups and executives who are trying to find the business use case for the monetary value. And sometimes testing can be difficult, not only to propose to devs to write for their own information, but how to also present that information in a way that creating a test team for it would be useful for higher ups and executives. How to best communicate that.
Yeah, awesome. So I captured that as measuring and communicating the business value of tests.
Absolutely.
Cool. Dara?
Yeah, mine is more obviously the education side. That's where I am. When would you think it's feasible to actually start teaching them to use tests in their work? Is it like very junior, or they need some experience under their belt so they know what they're talking about before they actually use testing? Like, when did you guys start to use testing in your work? Did you just go the traditional path and then it was someone else told you about it? Or did you know from the start, this is the way we're supposed to do it? This is how it should be done? And what's your opinion on that, essentially?
Yeah, great question. So I captured that as like when to teach testing in education, and also people's stories.
Yeah, that's it.
Cool. Who's next? Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
The question I would have is, if you were in charge, would you build if you were in charge of a video game project, would you build inside that project a team that would be 100% dedicated to test automation, or would you make test automation part of everyone's routine work on the project?
Okay, so maybe if I'm capturing that right, it's kind of how to structure teams of test specialists.
More, how do you distribute the responsibility of creating automated tests for your game?
Okay. So whose responsibility is it? All right. Okay. Anyone else? I'm gonna leave a very awkward silence. Oh yeah, Sebastian.
Question I have is, what's the best approach to kind of guide people towards more lower level unit tests as opposed to like giant end-to-end integration tests?
So yeah, I've captured that as like how to move to unit tests,
Yep, that works.
or maybe I'll put lower level. Cool. Anyone who hasn't proposed a question yet who would like to? Darren?
Sorry, asking a second question. What resources would you recommend for teaching beginning testing also? Because there is a lot on the server. I wasn't sure which ones are the best ones. I am constrained to Unity because the time I have with the students, only have them for 6 months. So trying to use C++ would be too difficult. So I'm stuck to Unity currently. So I'm in that area. I'm very selfish, as you can tell. That's why I asked them.
Cool. All right. Okay. Well, that seems like we have a bunch of stuff to talk about. Let's see. Well, I mean, maybe since you just asked it, Dara, and like I have an answer in my experience. What I used to use for teaching testing to developers was actually a project that a Unity engineer put together, I think in like 2014 or something, for a conference talk, and it's called I think it's called Growing Games Guided by Tests, which is a reference to the book Growing Object-Oriented Software Guided by Tests. But it basically, it's highly unlikely that you would not have to like modify it a lot now. It's like super out of date many versions ago. I think, yeah, when I used it at Microsoft, we had like an internal repo where we had made some changes and fixes and so forth. But basically, it's like make a asteroids game, or like a space, whatever it is, like a Space Invaders type game. And he has it set up where you have like the scenes, and so each scene, everything is already set up, and the tests are there, and then you basically just run the test and it fails, and then you write the code to make it pass, and then you run it again and it passes. So it's really kind of just making that point of like, here's how you might structure it, and it kind of lets you see here's some of the ways that you might, like, for example, provide a way to inject inputs rather than just pulling directly from the standard input source.
Super, thank you.
Anyone else have thoughts on that? Yeah, go ahead, Angel.
What I've done in the past is to start with making board games and try to not enter first into the physics or the physical part of the engine, like having a domain part and trying to, okay, this is a test, this is a really easy to make test, and try to first start there and then start moving to the iron and start from the domain layer. And as time goes on, trying to introduce to people how to handle time and how to do all of that. But using board games and everything has helped me a lot.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, Ricardo.
In that experience with Angel, when we talked first about the domain path to begin with unit testing, small, safe, we used a book which is, I think, a great one in this matter, which is Unit Testing Principles, blah, 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 patterns, blah, 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 by Vladimir Korikov, just in case you can use it somehow. It's a really good book about unit testing. Not the art of unit testing. This is another book, which I don't like, by the way. It's the Vladimir Korikov book, a really good one, I think.
Yeah, Ricardo, kind of follow-up question. Do you find it challenging with that to relate that to game code? I know like a lot of times the sort of standard material is helpful, but then maybe doesn't take account of the kind of nature and the architecture of how engines are put together, where they're just not really, separable enough to apply the normal practices to sometimes.
Yeah. That's why, as Angel have said, that's why we start just introducing people to testing, even not game dev testing, but then when they are used to the unit testing thing, then we get to the island and test on the scenes or movement, something like that.
Yeah, okay, so kind of teach the fundamentals in parallel
Yes.
and then later bring them together. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Actually, what I've found can work well for that is kind of having like a mob programming or ensemble programming environment where you have someone who knows what they're doing, and then you can just work on a kata together, and then kind of just do it in a test-driven style. It kind of really is a great way to like very quickly transfer that knowledge.
That's what we were doing half an hour ago.
Nice. That's awesome. Cool. Other thoughts on resources for teaching how to test, specifically for Unity or otherwise? David?
I just wanted to clarify something.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. Go ahead.
Are we talking about teaching testing or automated testing? Just to be clear.
I imagine automated testing.
Yeah, automated. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you. Sorry.
it's okay. I wasn't clear, so.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was going to second the probably the best way is learn by doing. Building out some sort of rudimentary prototype, for example, of how someone can play with a system. We did it with The Sims using the Unreal Engine for just getting people in there and working with how to actually use an automated testing system, and then getting that to work in a small sense. Shows people what's possible, and then allowing people to build on that knowledge on their own, and kind of giving people the option to do that is pretty important.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Any other thoughts, or shall we move on to the next question? Yeah, Michelle.
I would like to offer an alternative because I feel like the big constraint with teaching automated testing on a game, I feel like the main problem is that you have to have a game that is good enough to have a test automation framework inside of it. I'm kind of making a parallel here to how sometimes I wished I was taught QA when I started. And that is maybe using methods that are closer to what is done outside of games. The example I really liked, and unfortunately the thing that I never found the time to do in my work was, I think what would be a great test to get someone started on QA, just basic QA, not test automation, would be having them write test cases for calculator, because I feel like it's the perfect litmus test to realize how much depth and analysis skill you need to have to do that job. And so the parallel I would make is maybe perhaps take a test automation framework that can be off the shelf for web or desktop applications, and use them on the Windows calculator, for example. I kind of do the same exercise. Try to take a basic calculator and teach them how to use the framework and write tests to check that the calculator is working fine.
Yeah. The idea I had was have them write tests for like a Mario version, because everyone knows how Mario is supposed to operate. So like they would know what like the cases should be for that. But calculator probably would be more simple again, because it's even easier to figure out how it works.
Yeah. And I guess there you have the option of separating the two, right? Because I think if I understood what Michelle is saying, he's talking about the that kind of need to be able to break down like, hey, what are the test cases? And then there's kind of maybe separately from that the ability to automate the validation of those. And so like that example I mentioned earlier, that's an example where someone else has done that first part. And then the second part is just, okay, we're going to give you like, these are what you need to check, and then you go and do it. So it's maybe possible to break them up or kind of build onto it. I was also thinking, I actually haven't looked for a while at what like the Unity sample projects are. But things like I feel like back in the day we did something like with the Unreal Shooter game, where we kind of used that as a test bed. But and I guess it would be Lyra these days. Maybe Sebastian can tell us more about that. But yeah, and maybe using any examples where like it's the engines like here's an example of the features in the game where you have like a small microcosm that is it's like it's realistic but not big.
Massive.
Matthew, and hi and welcome, by the way. Sorry,
Yeah,
just to
sorry.
yeah, no worries, just to catch you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I missed the start, so I think I understand kind of what we're discussing. So I guess I had sort of a question, kind of off like a bit what David was saying. So I work and have worked basically my whole career in small studios where people oftentimes wear many hats or don't have a lot of hats, and that's one of the reasons that I got into sort of just started getting my interest in automation of testing, because it's like resource constrained. So now it's like it's easier, I guess, these days there's a lot more frameworks and things like Gauntlet. But now a thing I've noticed is sort of like I haven't figured out, I guess, like one, like how to get people to look at test reports more, and also how to get, like how to balance, I guess, the need for most small studios I work at, like, it's just like a constant time pressure of like we have to hit the next milestone, we have to deliver the next feature, and so like trying to get people to agree to the case of like, oh yeah, spend a few hours also writing tests, because these are small studios that are for some reason trying to tackle live service games, and like,
Yeah.
that's also what's led me into this, because it's like, oh, we need to, be able to verify things still work, and regression testing and whatever. And it's like, how are anybody like handling, I guess, when you don't have giant resources like an EA or an Activision,
yeah, definitely.
doing, like, I have no idea.
Yeah. So, real briefly, just to let you know, we had a discussion at the beginning, and everyone was okay with recording this. So that's what we're doing, if that's okay with you. And also, we kind of did a round of kind of gathering questions. From what you were saying, I took two. One is kind of like how to make test results matter. Which is similar to one we had as well, which was about measuring and communicating the business value of tests, and then how to balance like getting that done in a small studio. If that makes sense.
Those would be good summary, I guess.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So,
somebody asking the same question, so I apologize.
Yeah. No worries. That's totally. So I've added those to our list. Loba?
Right. So at least this will be maybe half relevant for Dara, because a part of this comes down to like how do you teach developers on an existing game project how to do test automation, which is a situation that, for example, like we have to do at Avalanche, which is a game studio that only in the last few years has really been picking up on this idea of like test automation and so we have a lot of developers who don't really know how to do it, and so that becomes a thing that we kind of need to teach. This is a big part of my job, is just teaching very good game developers how to do something they have never done before, which is a very different challenge from teaching students who have never made a game before, I imagine. But I wanted to echo something that has been kind of talked about here, which is that I do believe that it's good to teach people, whether experienced developers or complete newbies, test automation from the perspective of a software engineer rather than from the perspective of game development. Because my experience or my impression when we talk about test automation with game developers and with people who are thinking about it in the context of game development is that they think about it more as in like, oh, we get more to the end-to-end stuff. We want to be like, oh, I want to automate the playing of a level or like a gameplay scenario. And as kind of was implied by Sebastian's topic, this is probably not the kind of testing that we want to encourage investing the most time into. So when you start out from the perspective of software engineering, it's already accepted as best practices that unit testing is the base of the pyramid. That is like where you should invest the most time in making a lot of test cases. So I think it just establishes good practices to start from that perspective. And then I was going to talk about the challenges of teaching test development in or test automation in an ongoing project, probably in an established code base. As most of us are probably quite familiar with, game code tends to be very, very hard to test. Because it is often not written in a way that was meant to be testable. It's not particularly modular. It is spaghetti to hell and back, and so like taking the code that you have and trying to apply test automation to it is not going to put you in a situation where it's easy and approachable to teach test automation of games. It is better in that case, I would say, to, as some other people have said, to kind of make a little prototype, do a little extra, like a thing that is just there to demonstrate how to do automated testing, maybe under more ideal conditions than your actual project might be.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I guess it makes me think about that spectrum of where people are, because the sort of counterpoint to that is that sometimes when you try and teach people like the fundamentals, then you kind of bump up against people saying, well, this is completely irrelevant to me, like I can't use this, and then they're kind of turned off to doing it. One thing I liked about that Unity project that I mentioned is that it's kind of somewhere in the middle. Like it's in Unity, it's in a real engine, it's a real game, even though it's simple. And it is testing game mechanics, but there is also an element of modularization it's broken down a little bit. So it's kind of like trying to hit that. I think that was what his intention was to try and say, hey, well, how do I reach those people who are saying, well, I can't do testing, it's just completely irrelevant for me. To the point of the students, though, I guess students and also people who are like just starting out in their careers, I think, are much more malleable because they haven't yet been exposed to all the like bad practices. And so, yeah, like I know another like professor at a university who teaches this stuff, and I think has a lot of success with it. You do obviously the worlds collide eventually, right? And you're kind of like worried, like, did I ruin these people because now they know how to do it properly and they can't because of the code base they find themselves in? But it's yeah.
Well, for me, in my case, I agree 100%. That's why we do board games, because it's close enough to a game and not coupled enough and not coupled at all to the engine. And what I've found, at least in my local industry, is that it's much easier. Well, here there are no big companies, so it's so much easier to push automatic testing from the perspective of the software engineering side, because inside a company, QA people are treated like super bad, and programmers aren't really treated good, but they have a bit more leverage to negotiate and to push for changes. Like QA, the companies are just like, okay, so if we don't like this person, we'll fire them and hire somebody from wherever. We don't care. And I found that, at least from the people I know here, there was a lot more that could be done from the software team.
Yeah, that's a good point. One thing that just occurs to me briefly, which I don't think we've shared anywhere, is that the way that we onboarded people onto Sea of Thieves for testing, so that there was quite an intensive like onboarding process. So you would spend one day with senior engineer who would talk to you about like how the engine works and like how we use it and that kind of stuff. And it was the kind of thing where you bring your computer into a conference room and you have that day, and it's like lecture then practical, lecture then practical. And then the second day was with me, and we would do the same thing, only with writing tests. So obviously we had the frameworks all set up. And the example that we used was that, I think it was like the basic Unreal tutorial of like, how do you do like a networked door opening, and you go through step by step, and then we put tests on that step by step. And so I kind of had it set up where it's like, let's wait for a fixed period of time, and then like once they'd done that, then we'd be like, hey, now here's why you don't wait for a fixed period of time. Let's instead like poll for it until it gets that, that kind of thing. So that was, well, I guess I can't really speak as to how effective it was, but just because I'm biased, but that was at least how we went about it.
Super, thank you. I'm just conscious I've taken up lots of time, so I probably should move on. Like, thank you for everyone. I don't want to cut it off, but also I don't want to take over the whole meeting with my bullshit. So.
Yeah, well, I think we were also touching on some other topics that everyone's interested in as well. Cool. I guess, Dara, do you feel like I know we were talking about resources for teaching in Unity. Do you think we also covered when to teach testing?
Yeah.
Okay.
The answer both, essentially.
Cool.
The short answer is immediately and always.
Yeah, and especially if in your context, yeah, definitely teaching
they are
the
new.
base.
Like getting them in early and getting like at least think about it is better than 6 years in and then they just tell you to fuck off.
Yeah.
They don't want to know then.
Yeah, that Unity conferencing that I talked about, the test-driven development thing, I actually ran that a couple of times as like a guest lecture at Birmingham City University, for students, and it was it was tough because they weren't like using Unity, they weren't like as familiar with Unity as they needed to really be to make it good. But anyway, I'll move on.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that later on. If you want to come to Belfast, I mean, I'll ask you later. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it remotely, but I'm in Seattle, so that's a little bit of a trip.
Fuck. Sorry.
I would love to though. Okay, let's see. So what we've got, what would be a good one to talk about next? Maybe I think this was Michelle's topic, which was like how do you decide like whose responsibility it is to write the tests? And I think I also kind of heard in there like, how do you, like, if you're gonna have specialists in this field, where do you put them? Do you put them on a team that writes tests for people, or do you put them on a team that like is a catalyst for it, like getting developers to write tests? I'm hugely biased towards the second one because that's what we did on Sea of Thieves. I've seen the other one tried many times, and it very rarely produces good results at scale. Like, it can be helpful for like getting smoke tests in place and kind of the basics, but as soon as you get into like I'm not going to mention the name of the project, but I've seen it tried to kind of say, okay, we're going to embed an automation person with every team, and they're going to, like, as the stories are done, that they're going to write automation for it, and it's going to be great. A huge failure, incredibly expensive. And so for me, really, the only way is to say, like, developers have to own the testing, because that's literally their job, to make sure that stuff is functionally correct. And they need to be supported by a team of experts who can give them the tools they need to actually make that feasible. Right? It's not feasible just to say, okay, do it, but not give them any support. So you do need a team to create the environment. So that's my own kind of strong opinion on it, which maybe I should have held rather than maybe anchoring us. So yeah, who has thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
Well, since it was my question, maybe I'll let David go first.
No, definitely, and I think this might go back and answer some of the other things as well. Seconding what you're saying, Henry, going into the mindset of trying to make sure that people are not only creating their own tests for their own code, but I think the developers who write those systems will all just intrinsically know a lot of the details about their own tests or their own coding areas much more than someone else who has might be some sort of a plant on a team for automation. And I've seen the similar kind of deal in my time working. But the some of the tools creation around supporting people trying to do that, I've personally seen that a lot of the least invasive but yet most descriptive tools, like metrics that are easily reportable on, are usually some of the most useful. But and that's kind of the role of I'm currently a quality engineer. In another word, it's a tool engineer for developers for the sense of quality. It's a lot of overlap there in ways that aren't necessarily obvious. But anyway, that's my piece.
And I think Michelle, do you want to defer to Angel, or do you want us to go? That's a loaded question.
I'll go. I'll go
Why
last.
don't you? Okay.
Yeah, because I am pretty biased to the other way. So I guess if you started, I'll end so that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm also struggling to contain myself on this one. Go ahead, Angel.
Well, for me, in my experience at least, at the times that I've been able to do a really good test after developing the code was when I had mastered test first, and I already do really testable designs from the get-go. But before that, doing tests after for me was really complicated. So I guess that for teams it's the same, like doing a really weird extrapolation from my experience to a team thing. But that's what I've noticed.
I guess
Who else
the only
has
thing
thoughts?
I personally can add is, like, from the perspective of small studios, justifying a person whose only job is to write tests is going to be impossible. Like you'd be lucky enough to get people to write their own tests and have time in that for the schedule. Like, the idea of hiring somebody whose whole focus is that is just beyond what I can imagine ever getting done. So yeah, I don't think it for most companies of like 100 people or less that you're ever gonna be able to approach that as a possibility, unfortunately.
Well, I would say though that that role can be limited in time. So like for example, on Sea of Thieves, we had like a cross-functional group. So we had like someone from engine, someone from tools, someone from my team, someone from gameplay, and we all got together in the kind of pre-production phase, and that's where we like figured out how we were going to test stuff, right? Because like our goal was what frameworks do we need to enable the kind of testing that we're talking about to do continuous delivery, and so we kind of came together for that. But that group then disbanded, and then also, after like I guess 6 months, a year or so, like I moved on because I was like, okay, mission accomplished. So like if you need someone like that like forever, then that they're probably not doing it right. It should be the kind of role where, once you've achieved the benefit, then you could kind of move on. So that might be a way to kind of sell it.
That makes sense, but yeah, it would still
I understand it's still a hard sell, but
having a team to think about anything beyond shipping the game is often frustrating. So yeah, but anyway.
Definitely. Yeah, I guess I was maybe just speculating, like in that kind of smaller studio context, maybe framing it as like, hey, here's something that we really need to get right because, and then X, Y, and Z reasons. What we could do is get like, 1 or 2 or 3 senior engineers together right now to just kind of come together and think about it and prototype how we might do it for like a week or two. And then it's kind of like a small investment, but you've had some kind of energy behind it.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, that probably be like 1 or 2 people devoting a very short amount of time to setting something up and writing a document or something would be about as far as it could probably go.
Yeah.
That's the most realistic option, really, that would pay any dividends. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But one thing I wanted to throw in there is like my perspective on this is that like trying to write tests for someone else's code is ludicrously inefficient. And like especially if you ever tried to write unit tests for someone else's code, I have. It's really very impossible without changing the code that you're trying to unit test. And then even at those higher levels, then it's like, oh, there isn't a hook that does this, or oh, they changed the feature and I didn't know this. Like that disconnection and lack of connection or lack of, I guess, siloing is so inefficient that it's just incredibly wasteful of money. So we're thinking about like saving money, trying to have someone else do someone else's job is really wasteful. And I wonder if it comes from like a QA mindset versus a development mindset. And by QA mindset, I mean like traditional QA as treated and defined in the games industry. Because if you're coming from that QA background where you've internalized, it's my job to test that these features work. Then you kind of come into this thing and it kind of maybe makes sense, like, oh, I should write automated tests then for these things because that's automating my job. Whereas if you come at it from the developer perspective, where I was coming from, it's like, why the hell am I like rewriting this person's code so that I can put tests on it? That's just stupid. It just doesn't make any sense. So obviously they need to write them themselves because you can't separate the two concerns. And Henry rant. Sebastian.
Yeah, so I'm kind of also on the same boat that developers should write their tests, but also with, I'd say, assistance. So whether a producer or even someone from QA, if the developer is just kind of, this is the feature I've implemented, this is how, it's supposed to work, but maybe getting from like an outside viewpoint of, have you thought about these edge cases? Can you write tests to test against possible potential failures or something that maybe the developer hasn't thought about because they only focus on the feature and not how other systems can interact with said feature.
So if I hear you right, Sebastian, you're talking about kind of effectively like an expert partnering with folks on a team to transfer knowledge so that they can be better at what they're doing.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great model. I guess that's kind of what I ended up doing a lot. Like once you kind of have that thing in place, then you end up with like developers will just come. They'll be like, "Oh, I don't know how to test this," or I don't know what I should be testing in this case. So who do I go ask? And so that gets to the context of like, what's the value of having a team? Again, it's maybe to provide that place to go ask.
Yeah, and
I will
feel
say
like
though
also,
that
I'm sorry,
sorry,
Henry.
go ahead.
No,
I
I
was
was
just
just
gonna
gonna
say,
say that it also kind of like brings in like team collaboration more, and it's you become more than just a developer. You become like part of an ecosystem almost, as cheesy as it
right.
sounds.
Yeah, absolutely. So like my team on Minecraft, there were three of us, or it was initially just me, and then I got two more people. But so initially it was I just made a Slack channel, and it was me. So you could come there and ask me stuff, and then it was you could ask me and the other folks on the team, and they would answer more. And then it was like the developers would start answering. And so eventually, like my team didn't have to like answer any questions in that channel because it was just developers talking to developers. Lova?
Yeah, so I want to tie in a little bit about the topic of like embedding an automation specialist inside of a team. I think that this is a thing that will work, assuming that you also do what you talked about earlier, Henry, which is where you time constrain the kind of contract there, like the time spent embedding. So and again, coming from the perspective of a rather large studio, what you can do when you have maybe multiple projects that you're working on at the same time is if you have your automation team centralized, you can have automation specialists who embed in specific projects for a limited period of time based on who's currently got needs for test automation. And then, of course, like just breaking that down further, if there's a particular feature team within that project looking for help developing test cases or writing tests or understanding how to write their code in a more testable way, then you can further embed into that kind of test, but only for like the limited time of that initiative. And so yeah, the flexibility of just like making sure that like your resources are being spent in places where they are currently being needed is extremely important no matter what. But I believe it becomes easier when you have these kinds of if you have a large context or like a large studio, so that you can actually move that expertise around, and you will always kind of have that need. Otherwise, I do agree with Matthew that I think it can be very hard to justify like a dedicated test automation specialist on a team when you just don't really have that long-term need and don't have anywhere to move them.
That does actually make me think of kind of another anti-pattern on that space, which is where you have a separate team and you're like, hey, this team is going to do automation, but no one else is bought in. So that team can't really do anything. and everyone else is like, oh, I'm too busy to do stuff. So there was a period where I briefly like tried to start like an internal consulting team in Xbox. In fact, that's actually how we met, Laura, because you were one of our customers, to kind of go out to all of our internal studios and help. And like one of the kind of pillars of that was it's partnership, not contracting. Like the very least we demand is that whoever we're working with put up at least one person who can work with us. And I think that also works in the microcosm. So like the number one thing that I would try and do when trying to get the developer team a team of developers to get on board with testing, it would be like talk to them. So if a question came up, instead of being like, oh, go look at the docs, right? It's like, no, I'm going to go to their desk. I'm going to say, hi, I'm Henry. How can I help you? Let's sit down and pair on this together. So like taking all of those opportunities to really reach out and partner, and then you kind of become that trusted partner. And also you're modeling that you're taking it seriously, right? Rather than just like, oh yeah, it's my job is to write a test framework. I don't really care if you use it. All right. Should we go Angel, and then we'll pass it back to Michelle to wrap up?
Please continue. I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry.
No worries. All right, Michelle.
Thank you. So I guess what I can do is share a bit of my past experience on this, because when I started working on my last project before leaving Ubisoft, so I was in charge of helping teams adopt test automation. And we went for the approach of actually having everyone contribute to writing test automation rather than having a dedicated team, sorry. Especially because, well, first of all, it would have been, I believe, a more difficult conversation to justify staffing a dedicated team on that project. We were already a lot of people and things were being expensive enough as is. There was also another stake for us in that we, well, I guess like a lot of companies in this industry at the moment, our QA department was really struggling to demonstrate their value and, well, and therefore make the career path interesting for people in it. And I'm really talking about career path, I'm talking about compensation and all of these things that are, well, a very common topic in this industry for people doing QA. And so the approach that we had with our manager was twofold. Was that, first of all, it was a matter of kind of engaging a culture shift where people were taking more ownership on the quality of what they were shipping and trying to move away from that, let's say, old school model of, oh, hey, I just pushed something. Can you just test it out for me, please? And well, and also at the same time, upscale our QA and try to use this as leverage. Say, hey, see, we're doing a lot more interesting stuff now. Look, we're coding. Look, we have something that looks like visual, and try to get people a better career path, better compensation, and all of that stuff through that. So we kind of went that way. It was a lot of coaching across a lot of people, a lot of design process to make things efficient. It did produce results, but it's true that at the same time, I realized that it was everybody must contribute to writing automated tests, but QA are the ones driving it. So we kind of tried something new, but also we tried to do something new, but also in the culture that we had, and that culture was that if QA wasn't push it for it, not a lot of people would think about it. So it worked in some areas, it worked with some teams and some departments. It didn't work with others because basically it was ultimately up to the people who were willing to play along or not. And after trying many different ways to reach out to the people who weren't buying it at first, it's true that after a while I was like, maybe I should just like maybe we should ask for like 5 extra people and just get it done because the conversation was getting difficult, and also they were delaying us on important things. And so there was that kind of contradiction of, hey, we really need your support because like things are breaking all the time and we can get work done and we keep getting delayed. And at the same time, every story or request that we would send our way would be delayed to hell and back. So yeah, sometimes I felt like after 6 months of back and forth, I was like, you know what, just give me the documentation and I'll do it myself, which is the worst way to go. But I mean, at some point you just get frustrated. And I can understand that maybe some people have been in that culture and are like, I'm not gonna wait 6 months for you to do what I need to get this done. So I'm just gonna build myself an autonomous team. But it's true that it doesn't scale and that it's transactional in the end. I guess in our case, we weren't in the right position to have more traction from project management. And that maybe was a mistake from the get-go, maybe trying to go our own way instead of maybe getting adoption from there. So yeah, it produced result and I have no regrets doing it that way. And a lot of people in our QA team grew a lot from that and they learned a lot, and so it was all worth it. But it's true that sometimes I reflect and I wonder if I shouldn't have gone the other way as well. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Do you have the opportunity to go to kind of take the learnings and skills that those folks got and then kind of try again next time and like maybe make more progress?
I haven't gotten to that point yet.
Yeah, it just made me think of like our situation pre-Sea of Thieves. You know, like we didn't. I guess we learned something, but like so Rare. I think the benefit that Rare had was that they had a really strong engineering culture. So they were already very, very. I guess they prioritized heavily doing things right from a code perspective, but they just didn't include any testing in that. So I guess that kind of made it easier. But like the first project that I was on there, I was like an SDET on Connect Sports Rivals. And again, in that kind of situation, right, where it's like, hey, you know, your job is to go make a framework and write a bunch of tests and stuff. And it had like minor benefit, but it didn't really take off. You know, we just got to like hey, we have smoke tests and stuff, so we know that when a build comes out of the farm that it's stable and it's worth putting manual testers on it. It's worth deploying to 200 dev kits in Prague or whatever. But I guess like we took those learnings to Sea of Thieves, more as like what didn't work. So like we knew very much that like it didn't work what we had tried before, and then that informed what we did on the next one. Anyway, I'll stop like scrabbling for a silver lining. Cool. Well, thank you. Let's see how we're doing. So we have just 25 more minutes. So let's see. I feel like maybe a good topic to move on to was actually the one that David brought up, and so maybe he can catch up on the recording. But that was measuring and communicating the business value of tests. So I think his question was around how do you when people start asking questions about like, why are you doing this? What's the value? Can you justify spending the money on this? What do you say then? Yeah, Loa.
So we did spend quite a bit of time trying to do this exact thing to get buy-in from project management, and so I can just go about what we did. What we ended up doing, we used existing case studies, the GDC talks that Rob Masella had held from the Sea of Thieves production, and of course Henry's talk about Minecraft were both very good sales pitches in and of themselves. But then for our project, we would just start measuring stuff. Like we talked to QA, We looked at Jira, and we just did things like we measured how much time does QA essentially waste doing extremely banal levels of like smoke testing that they could be doing more deep, more exploratory testing. How often do we get regressions? Like how often does the same code break over and over again? And we would try and put that into numbers that could eventually be converted into money. And we'd just say, okay, by not having automation, this is costing us this much money. If we had automation, it would cost us less money. And that became the business case. Just really just trying to break things down into numerical values and showing like this is how we could improve by introducing more automation into these exact areas.
Mm. Can you say more about how you kind of took that that information, say about like regressions, and kind of how did you convert that to money?
We basically kind of went with a heuristic. Just said like every time this regressed, it would be an hour of a programmer's time, and then we would say like an hour of a programmer's time is this much based on the average salary of the programmers at Avalanche. It was like,
Nice.
here's how much
Okay,
money
yeah.
you're losing every time this happens again.
Yeah, so basically you were kind of doing like a wasted hours approach.
Yeah, I would say so. It was
Yeah.
a lot. It was basically everything came down to wasted hours in the end.
Yeah, I listened to this podcast actually, which is kind of about like platform engineering, which is like the burgeoning field of like doing this at scale in wider tech. It's this guy Abhi Noda who has, I forget what it's called. It's called, I think it's the Engineering Enablement Podcast, but like it's really good because they talk to people who have implemented this kind of stuff at a whole bunch of different companies. And what I really took away from that is that like the biggest kind of selling point is like exactly what you've said. That if you can say like this is how much time was wasted, then that is like effectively as good as a dollar value. All right, so we have a few hands up, and it's helpfully showing the order. So let's go Angel, and then Matthew, and then Michelle.
Great. What I've done when I have always worked in really inefficient organizations, and when I've had people from the team that were interested in this, what I've always done is not asking and choosing really wisely my battles to fight, and only testing what was really, really profitable to test, because then I will have results to show, and no one could like argue that I wasn't doing my job. But I wouldn't, if I had asked, they would say no. But since I have done it without asking anybody and it had worked well, I had a basis from to which to keep going. And yeah, that's my approach. It probably doesn't scale well, but to ignite the spark, it's probably at least in my experience, it was the only thing that I could do. There wasn't any other way, I think.
And who were you, I guess, selling that to? Was that kind of like just engineers local to the team, or was it kind of like people higher up who were like asking questions? Or
first, it's well, it depends on the team, but first it was to the other people in the team. If they buying, then there's only up. And but if they don't buy in, it's the people in the team, because if they don't like it, it's not my right to start introducing a practice that they don't like. But there was it was in a pretty small team, and we were all up for it except for the CEO that was previously the CTO and didn't really program anymore. And it was how do I put it? It was pretty frustrating because it was like just phrases like "don't do testing," and then he went away. "Don't use link queue," and then he went away. And just like saying random things that you shouldn't do and not being in the day-to-day programming. It was weird, but at least on the since the team was like cohesive and was up for it, then it was easier to fight, I guess. I don't really like fighting metaphors, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Matthew?
Sorry. Yeah, somewhat similar to on how I've had to learn how to fight my battles, and you know, to it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission sometimes. But yeah, like generally my approach in situation when I've been in places where there isn't the culture of it or necessarily buy-in, it's often looking for like somewhat similar to I hope I'm saying your name right, Love. You know, like gathering, like working in places where there's not data being gathered regularly, and it's like instead of making a emotional argument, gathering information like just in an automated way, a lot of times I found it starts to like just build the case for itself. You know, instead of I worked on a project where our QA manager's like, performance, it's a VR game, and he's like, performance feels soupy. What does soupy mean? When did that happen? Right? Like that's not actionable. So what I did from that was, you know, build up an automated system that started capturing performance data on our levels, because like we would just we would do really inefficient things like, you know, cut, like we think it happened at this point, cut a build from like 4 commits after that or something, right? Like, or 2 commits before, like just these weird bisect builds. And it's like, well, if we can just run something that's going in the background when nobody's looking, that, you know, tells us at what point things changed, like we don't have to do that anymore. So yeah, it started to be a lot of, I guess my approach has been, yeah, take things that are really high, like obviously high value, like, you know, are causing obvious problems, and find just some way like to present data to shareholders. It'd be like, you know, here's a really basic thing that's providing it, and then suddenly they're like, oh wow, you doing like even a couple of hours of work to provide basic data about a common problem, suddenly starting to make the case of like, maybe you should spend more time, you know, writing more things to discover more problems ahead of time. And so I guess that's sort of the path I've been taking over the last couple of years, is really just like slipping in these things, like identifying high value reoccurring problems, and then in my, you know, doing it myself, providing the testing, and then over time, like, yeah, just my responsibilities shifting from being, oh, you're doing UI 100% of the time, to you're doing more automation, you know, like 80, you know, you've gone from doing it 10% of the time to 80% of the time.
So if I understand you correctly, you're kind of saying that by focusing on those things which people intuitively understand are big problems and showing progress against them, you kind of sidestep that whole need to really like show monetary data.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I think the monetary, like, the idea
just to say, I think maybe some other folks on the call might have the kind of like big studio issue of like people are so far removed that they don't really get like that intuitive understanding, so they're far away, removed in the org, and they're kind of saying, well, here, what are these people doing? Like, what's the value? And if you say to them, well, we did this thing and it was obviously good, then they're like, well, show me the numbers. You know, so it sounds like though that yours could easily translate into like what Lobo was saying of the wasted time, right? Because you're kind of saying like, hey, instead of wasting time waiting, you know, to figure, like doing these builds to figure out where the performance went bad, like we just know. Although I guess you then run up against the problem of like, does the culture in the company like devalue QA time, right? Then you run into that whole thing of like, oh, well, QA is cheap, so they can do pointless stuff, and that's much better than a developer spending 10 minutes doing something.
Right. I've also, I mean, probably I've been friends with my QA manager now for like 7 years across 3 different companies. So I often will go to him and be like, what are the things that would benefit you and your team as well? Which
Yeah.
I think is an important thing, because people get scared and they're like, you want to replace QA, or we can just throw bodies. And you're like, well, if I talk to QA and find out how I can improve their lives so that they can focus on the things that, are less, automatable or whatever, however you want to say that. But
Yeah.
I
Definitely.
was
Awesome.
inspired at one point by, there's a GDC talk, I don't remember from when, by Elon Ruskin from Insomniac, where he talks about, or maybe this was at something else, he talks about making the case to get everybody on the team SSDs, and how much effort he went into to like calculate out like the actual per developer cost of that. I'm not that thorough of a person like he is, but I try and find other ways to make those kinds of cases. But yeah, like that's what he did, is he had to prove to his boss on a numeric level, and it was insane how he did it. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Awesome. Michelle?
Yeah. To me, actually, both approaches that were mentioned they kind of converge together for me. Clearly, the name of the game is measuring, not because basically, I think what a lot of people misunderstand when asking the question of, hey, can you demonstrate the value of doing automated testing, is I feel like people understand it as, can you show me how doing this is going to make me earn more money? Whereas I believe that the actual goal is that we should rather demonstrate how we can get to the same result spending less money, and therefore making more benefits. And it's true, and a former colleague of mine said it best, that the biggest cost in game development are bugs. And the thing is, it's important to be able to find the ways to measure how much money is wasted on a bug, and there are ways to do that. Some of them were touched upon on earlier. I also think what you need to take into account, especially if you're working in a DevOps related model, is if you lose your ability to ship, you're putting a lot of teams in idle time, and that also adds up to the counter. And coming from a career where I never worked with teams that were smaller than 150 people, trust me, the bill racks up really, really quick. Even if you're just waiting on one person to do the fix. And actually, the ironic thing is that in some cases, when trying to have this conversation, we realized that we actually didn't have the tools to calculate that, because the project at the base wasn't following proper best practices in project management. The Jira project wasn't properly maintained and all that kind of stuff. And so in some situations, we couldn't calculate that in an accurate enough way to work in our favor. So yeah, we kind of went both ways there, but definitely, yeah, the goal is, I think, to always start the conversation with, at a lower level, hey guys, what is making your life difficult today? And taking the answer that comes up the most often and work on that. And it's ultimately one of the 7 principles of testing, defects cluster. 20% of your components are going to create 80% of your defects. And at a higher level, it turns into, we don't really know what we're doing because we keep running into these problems. And every time these problems happen, they take X hours to fix and Y $1,000 to the project. Here's how I can cut this by Z%, and you're gonna save, I'm running out of letters, money.
So I guess to kind of devil's advocate that a little bit, I feel like the argument right after that is people saying, "Well, I don't have time." It was kind of going back to Matthew's point a little bit as well, right? I don't know if there's like there isn't like a clean solution to that, I guess, but I just wanted to kind of point it out, because I definitely have encountered that. You can have people like fully bought in and be like, "Yeah, I totally would love this, but like I don't have time." And I guess maybe that comes into the question about pre-production from earlier, which I don't think we're going to get to. But I do think there's a role for this kind of stuff in pre-production, and that role is to get the frameworks ready and get the practices ready. That's what we did on Sea of Thieves. We were fortunate to have everyone working on the Unity prototype, so we were free to like get everything like set up for continuous delivery and the ability to test and test frameworks in the Unreal game, like the real game, and then bring people in. So yeah, I definitely think that it's an important part of your technical pre-production to be able to say how you plan to test your title. And so even if you're just saying, well, I plan to really just have no consideration for that and burn money on manual QA, or I plan to do this, or some mix of the two. I also wanted to bring in Andrew Frey's talk that he did recently about Rollerdrome, because I'm a huge fan of what he did on that. Obviously, it's like a small indie title, it's constrained, so he knows what he's doing, but he's having trouble getting people on board. And so his main things, again, this is my takeaway from it. I highly recommend watching his talk. But in terms of like those business values, he's calling out things like the speed of iteration. You can actually iterate faster, and then you can produce a better title faster with less waste. He's also talking, I don't know if he uses the term exactly, but he's talking about business agility. So he talks about the fact that they had test coverage of their like highest risk area, which was like the player physics for going up all the ramps and stuff. After they had that, I think previously he said they were doing like a week or two of code lockdown, and then with the tests, that gave them the confidence to actually, they made like a major change to their physics system, like right before a milestone, where previously they would have been locked down. So that's like, in terms of communicating business value, I think that's one that may really resonate with business people, is like that you have more options. Like I don't have to wait, 3 months to like, crunch down the bugs until I can release something. And so I saw the question about the name of the talk. I'll try and find a link to it. But if you just search for, if you go onto the, oh yeah, thanks, Laura. All right. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I'm mindful. I wanted to leave like 5 minutes to do like a little mini retrospective. So Lova, maybe you'd like to kind of close us out on this topic. Oh, you think you're muted.
Oh yeah, I just lowered my hand. I didn't actually unmute. So one thing that I realized when I was listening to the others' perspectives on this is that one thing I think is worth differentiating is also who is it that you're trying to convince, because your approach will vary. Like when I talk about the numeric value and kind of the monetary value, that's usually because I'm trying to convince an executive or a project manager, someone who's kind of far up the chain and isn't really doing isn't seeing the day-to-day work, the day-to-day frustrations that automated testing can solve. But when I was convincing people in the team, people working on the game day-to-day, that they wanted to do test automation, it would be a completely different perspective. There were no numbers involved. It was only like, there was all feels. It was all vibes based. I was just trying to get people to say like, hey, here's how implementing automated testing makes your life feel nicer as a developer. One of the best examples we had of this was we had this smoke test that would run as part of our CI pipeline. We realized that the game started crashing. QA reported, hey, the game's crashing. And we could look at the test history, and we said, okay, the tests were green here, then they turned red here. There are 5 change lists in Perforce between these two. One of these 5 is the reason why it's crashing. And that cut down like almost all of the investigation time for that test. And so many developers came to me afterwards and was like, that was really cool. It was really cool that we could do that. That's neat. And like you could tell that like that got us a lot of buy-in, just because we saved people time and they felt that.
Yeah, it's a good point about knowing who you're trying to convince, because what I guess one thing that I had done or had needed to do was to convince the people who were funding my team, that like, hey, you bought into this, you want me to do it, but like you need to be reassured that we're making progress. So like I used code coverage on Sea of Thieves just to get, because we were sponsored by the QA organization, so we were able to say like, hey, you like this, and then just test count on Minecraft as a proxy, because code coverage was hard to get. So not trying to infer a lot from it, but just that was enough to kind of show the people who were funding from the QA side, hey, look, this is having some benefit. All right, cool. Well, I'm sure we could continue talking a lot longer. I know there's so much more I'd like to talk about, but I did want to just take a few minutes to do a quick like mini retrospective. This is obviously, just something that came up just as an idea. I'm curious, kind of the classic, like what went well, what didn't go well, what could be improved. Would we like to do this again? Is this like a thing? What, if anything, from this would you like to have going forward? Like if we were to set up some kind of like series of, kind of like online meetup of this kind of nature. So yeah, I don't know if anyone would like to share thoughts. Yeah, go ahead, Angel.
Okay, well, I have to say that this felt like really safe and reassuring because I've been feeling like really alone, like in an island of this kind of practices inside of my local community and industry. And even though I had real confidence in what I was doing, having a lot of people say that this doesn't work was like really, it was complicated. But having a place like this, it felt like it felt it's a bit cheesy, but it felt like home. So yeah, and I would gladly come here again, obviously.
Yeah, I can kind of plus one on that, but like also just the existence in a way where like the existence of the automated testing in game dev Discord server becomes part of that as well. I think that a lot of people who work in test automation can feel kind of lonely because often there's like one person, two people on an entire team who does it. No one else in the company really cares, depending on how your culture is. So at that point, it's really nice to just have maybe a more inter-company, international community of people who are all interested in this very kind of niche thing. So yeah, it's very nice to just have this forum.
Yeah, I'd actually also echo that. Like I haven't done much testing myself, but just having you guys talk about it, it seems less overwhelming to get it actually implemented into the course rather than like seeing this huge wall of stuff and like how do I start this? Whereas now I have like a decent idea how to get actually going. So thank you to everyone that had stuff, suggestions and things like that.
Anyone else have any thoughts they'd like to share? Yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I guess, I feel the same as everything that's been said. I think probably just for one improvement, I think trying to tackle we may have tried to tackle too many things in one short time span, which is probably inherent to all of us. I feel like, this is a great discussion and like I really appreciate everything about it, and I learned many things, and it also just validating to not feel so alone. But yeah, I've probably, and for the first one, I think it's natural to try and like want to just talk about a lot of things. So I don't think this isn't some like bad. I just think like future ones could probably be improved by more focus.
Yeah, definitely. And they said like, wait, I've seen
I don't think
ways
that's
of
bad for today.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's I think it's kind of almost good in a way that there's more to talk about than we have time to talk about, because it suggests that we might want to do it again. But yeah, I've definitely seen, like meetups where they'll have a topic. I've also seen kind of, like lean coffee style where it's, I guess, similar to this where we build the agenda at the beginning. But yeah, it's a bit more limited, like each person gets one. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
No, maybe just like building on to from what Matthew said, like if in future ones, if we try to limit, maybe like we may have to set like a hard limit for how many topics that we're working on, and maybe also set a hard limit on time per topic, because we know that we have X amount of time, we have X amount of topic, and that should let us pretty easily figure out like we can spend this much time on each topic.
Yeah, and definitely like because like because I did run the real roundtables last year, so I got an experience of like how Amdu does it normally, and it is much more focused on like trying to limit the time, trying to increase engagement, but it's also a much bigger audience, and I guess also in the virtual format, like I felt worse about cutting people off, like in the in-person one, like Andrew said to me like, make sure you brutally cut people off if they're going long. but like on the virtual one, it's like I was like trying to err on the side of letting people speak.
Very understandable.
Should we, Ricardo?
We may use in the future link coffee as a technique to inbox the intervention, just in case.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if it's like the link off is the one where you have like a timer, right? And you usually go like 5 minutes, and then people do like a thumb vote for if you want to extend by a minute.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be improvement. Angel?
It could also be interesting if the topics were decided on the Discord chat, and we had like
yeah,
that was it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Oh, yeah, I thought about that, and I also thought about the value of like in the small group setting of like people being able to kind of speak out loud like their questions, because I think we maybe got a little bit more nuance from it. But yeah, it's definitely something to consider. Yeah, I had like some topics in my back pocket in case no one had any topics, but we had more than enough. And yeah, sorry, I should have introduced my dog sooner. That's my bad. Sebastian?
Yeah, if this is going to be like a recurring series, the one thing I'd probably suggest is maybe having a frequently asked questions if we get more people on board. So we're not like killing time, repeating ourselves.
Yeah, that is a good point. All right. Well, Lucky, come back here. People want to see you. He's busy. So yes, so from Lucky and me, thanks very much everyone for coming. Super appreciate it. I learned a lot from all of you and had a great time chatting. And I'll see what I can do about organizing something on an ongoing basis.
Thanks, Henry. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
everybody.
for setting this up, Henry.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Hi again. If you made it this far, congratulations. That was a long video. I hope you got some value out of it. If you like this kind of thing, you want to help me grow this channel, then please consider liking and subscribing. And also, if you would like to be involved in future meetups of this nature, please hop into the Automated Testing and Games Discord, because that's where I'll be announcing future events. And I look forward to seeing you there. Thanks very much.